want to hear from the Council for Clean Capitalism. They'll share their view on the vision for a green economy, the public choices needed to support it, and the role of business to accelerate change. And so we're just, in a sense, think about this as a continuation of the discussion that we've just had, but we'll get another perspective. So thanks for being here, everyone. And maybe I'll start with you, Toby, because this idea kind of emerged from you, and then we'll get some perspectives. You know, one of the critical challenges we were having in the last debate was not that there was a lack of good ideas, not that there was a lack of identifying the problem, and not that there was a lack of opportunity, but there was a lack of choreography to make social change happen, and to do it in a way that has a kind of triple bottom line value. Governments need to see value, investors need to see value, and the consumer needs to see value. In your view, what are the kind of mechanisms? And I know this side of the room, can you see Toby there at all? You can't see them. I'll move out of the way. What's your view of the best way to do that, and why this council may be one of them?
Sure. I mean, the last panel talked about it. There's a lot of market gaps out there, whether you look at missing information or missing incentives, unlevel playing field, missing investment or missing infrastructure. And from a business perspective, you know, we want to optimize wealth, but we want to optimize wealth holistically. And right now we're not doing that. There's a lot of forms of wealth that we're not optimizing, we're not even counting. And so if you take stock and look at how does public policy get made today, what Evan was talking about earlier, he's going to the NDP convention, the Liberals leadership just happened, we have the current government. How does policy get made? Well, policy gets made largely by business these days. Governments are reactive, and when you talk to policymakers, many cases there's policies that start in the business sector. And so if you look at which parts of the business sector are really harnessing the power of business to influence policy, it has generally been the lowest common denominator part out of the industry associations, generally. And you know, one of the catalytic moments for me was a few years ago, the Chamber of Commerce in the United States, which is run by Tom Donahue, lost several high-profile members like Nike and Procter & Gamble, and they left because they were unhappy with the Chamber of Commerce lowest common denominator approach to climate change and fighting the carbon pricing legislation that was going through on the Hill in the US. And I had an opportunity to bump into Mr. Donahue, the head of the US Chamber of Commerce, and this was the sort of moment that really kind of catalyzed the opportunity maybe for Canada. And I asked him if he was worried that he'd lost some of his members because they weren't happy with his climate change lobbying positions. And he said, no, it was just a few members. And I said, yeah, but they're Fortune 100 members. And you could tell he was bothered by it a little bit. And I said, well, do you think maybe if somebody created another group just to snatch up those, you know, the leadership members, so they could start to push from a highest common denominator, so we could really holistically optimize our wealth, you know, across the spectrums where we're not doing it right now? Do you think that would be a good opportunity? And then he looked at me, and he had a couple of glasses of wine at the time, and he said something which I still don't understand, but he said, no dash, no cash. And I didn't know what it meant, but I think it meant that I had to move fast. And so, and then, you know, I said, oh, well, I'll take the dash. And he said, well, maybe, you know, someday maybe my daughter would want to talk to you guys and work with you or something. And then he took off. And so, come back to Canada. What a neat country we live in. We have more natural capital per capita than any country in the world. We have a greater diversity of human capital in many respects than any country in the world. We have a more stable financial system than almost any country in the world. You bring that all together, we're sitting in a pretty interesting spot. And then you have these leading companies from the resource sector like Catalyst, from the financial sector like Sun Life, from the telecommunications sector like TELUS, and leading global players like Interface that are really carving out a whole new way of doing business. And you have all these types of companies and companies like Teck, leading minerals companies, and they have CEOs and they have heads that have the courage. They recognize they can carve out a new system. They recognize that they can make new rules, that we're not price takers, we're price makers when it comes to the policies and the framework that we can operate in. And they've come together and shown a lot of courage to systematically and in a disciplined way carve out a few priorities that we're going to move the ball forward on. And that's about enough airtime for me because these guys are the ones with the they don't have the hot air, they have the the punch.
But, well, Toby's got the dash, and now let's talk to the cash. But I think the genesis is really interesting because these ideas come from somewhere. So let me start, I mean, you mentioned Interface, so let's start with Claude. I mean, why is this an interesting idea and your fundamental view of how social change may happen in terms of this?
Especially when I talk to people in business and I ask them, what is the change? And I often realize that from their perspective, they're trying to change the way they do things. And in society in general, we're trying to change the way we do things. But really what needs to take place is to change the way we think in order to change the way we do things. And that's where the gap is. But if you do introduce a new way of thinking, then how do you do it? Education is a way to bring people to think differently and challenge the beliefs. We're not the product of our DNA. I was reading a book, The Biology of Belief. It's fascinating. We're not the product of our DNA. We're the product of what we believe. So a lot of people, in a lot of instances, it's about changing what people believe to be true. And that's not easy. But through education, and what type of education? Well, one of them is, how about educating people on what's the impact of the things that we use? And that is a big education that we could do, is educate people on what's the impact of the raw material that goes into the product that we use. So education for us is very important. We are trying to be a leader on educating people on everything that concerns sustainability. And to us, it's for every day, for everybody, is to say, how can we share our story and how can we educate people that it is possible? If it exists, it is possible.
Andrea, Toby also mentioned TELUS. Why in your mind is this a good fit for your company, the council?
At TELUS, we believe that there's a symbiotic relationship between our business and our communities. And so we have a deep-rooted commitment to corporate social responsibility. When it comes to some of the things that we've been recognized for in that vein, we've been on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index for 12 years. That's a feat unequaled by any other telco or cable co across North America. We've also been on the Corporate Knights Global 100 Most Sustainable Companies list for 3 years. And so, you know, we take our commitment to sustainability very seriously. We have also made some public commitments with respect to some goals we want to achieve. By the year 2020, we want to have reduced our overall energy by 10%, and we want to have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 25%. And so with those publicly disclosed commitments, we've set in place several programs to be able to achieve those. One of them is with respect to our real estate program and consolidation. So we're a national company across a few major cities in Canada. Over the last 3 years, we've reduced our square footage by 1 million square feet. And that, for those of you in the real estate industry, would know that that's a significant reduction. And we have another 400,000 square feet that we're planning to reduce. We also have a program called Work Styles, where we are encouraging our team members to work from home or wherever they're most productive. By 2015, we expect that 70% of our team members will be working remotely, and that is a very aggressive commitment by our company. The other thing that we have committed to is for any new buildings, and we recently completed one in Toronto a few years ago, just outside of the Air Canada Centre. It is LEED Gold. We completed a LEED Gold Ottawa building a few years ago as well, and in Quebec City, we silver certified a retrofitted Canada Post old building. In Vancouver, we are currently building a new tower, and it's going to be LEED Platinum, and it'll be the first one under the new LEED Platinum objectives. We also are making a huge commitment with respect to our data centers. Here in the Greater Toronto Area, we just recently certified an existing data center as LEED Gold, and we are embarking on 2 new builds, one in Quebec and one in BC, that are also LEED Gold minimum. The final thing I'll just say on our other commitment here is that we're also taking an interesting approach to reusing and recycling heat. So data centers give off a lot of heat. We've typically in the past spent a lot of money cooling our equipment. And in Vancouver, we are using the heat from one of our data centers to actually heat the new residential tower that we're building and the new office tower that we're building. So we've got 1 million square feet of office and residential real estate that is actually using the heat off of our own telco equipment. So it's a really innovative and committed way to make sure that we're demonstrating our part in the environment.
I want to get everybody involved in this discussion, but the council has initiated a couple things. Green bonds, pursuing simple regulatory tweaks and credit enhancement tools to unlock capital for green infrastructure. We talked a bit about that, so that's one of the things the council's talked about. Andrea, you're just talking about green buildings and LEED certification. Another thing is removing barriers to develop more efficient buildings, fast-tracking permitting and approvals, and creating favorable financing mechanisms. That's another one. And inclusive wealth accounting, creating tools and the imperative to incorporate natural capital into our national accounts. This is the triple bottom line we've talked a lot about. Human and social capital, natural capital, which would reframe the management of resources and enable us to strike that balance between various forms of wealth-producing capital. And we talk a lot about this. There's lots of names for it. Polluter pays, triple bottom line. There's lots of stuff. That's what the council's talking about. And maybe in those, with that around us, maybe Philip, I'll ask you, where do you kind of see your company taking a role within this context and moving the ball forward?
Thanks, Evan. You don't seem to be following our notes here at all. And when I come up on the stage, my contact lens went off my eye, so I can't read anything. So I'll just have to speak off the cuff. When you're talking about the role that Sun Life sees for itself within the Council for Clean Capitalism, we see sustainability as one of the core elements of our strategy moving forward. Sustainability is all about the long term, thinking about the long term, thinking about tomorrow. We're in the business of making promises to our customers about their lifetime financial security with the financial products that we sell to them. So we think about the long term, and consequently, moving forward with sustainability is inherent in our corporate culture. It's important to us that we think about the long term when we operate today and we make those decisions. So the mission of the Council for Clean Capitalism and the approach that Sun Life Financial takes to sustainability are very, very congruent. So we see a lot of synergies between our corporate strategy and the activities and programs of the Council.
Kevin, let's go Kevin and then Francis. So we'll do it that way. Are we good with that? And your role in terms of how you see the role of the council, but also maybe the barriers to sustainable economy, and if those tools we talked about, whether it's bonds, buildings, or accounting, are the tools that you need to unlock that.
From our perspective, as Canada's second largest paper producer, sustainability, the green approach is just fundamentally a part of our business. It makes sense, and it makes economic sense for us to conserve. We use about $150 million worth of energy to create our products. Conservation, creation of good green energy is part of our process. If in fact the government or the financial community embraces that with a bond structure that incents people to do more of that, I think that would help companies like ours. But we're incented for the reason that it makes good economic sense for our company. I think the Canadian. I'm not a big fan of overreaching economic policy, but in Canada, the opportunity, I think, is robust right now. I heard it on the last panel. One is that the Canadian economy survived the global banking crisis better than most. Two, it has an extraordinarily natural resource reach to the world. And in that regard, safe harbor money has flowed into Canada. Where is that money? Is it going to flow in and flow out? How does the Canadian government, and coupled with industry and the banking community, get those investments into the Canadian soil? That allows, will they incent green investments? And then those natural raw resources that are here, to convert those here in Canada provides tremendous opportunity for additional jobs, and to make sure that those resources are used responsibly in Canada is a tremendous opportunity, but it is also a tremendous obligation. So I'd like to see if the government with industry and the financial could bundle that together and make some progress there.
And we'll pick up on that. Francis.
As business people, we know that what gets measured gets done. That's how we manage our businesses. HP is currently running a competition for first-time sustainability reporters. We're actually trying to get small businesses to write a sustainability report. They're measuring the things that they've never measured before. The council is really asking government to step up and measure something they've never measured before. If we don't know what our natural capital is and whether it's going up or down, how are we going to manage it? What we're asking government to do, and putting the weight behind the collective voice that we have here, is to do something that's already underway in other parts of the world. We're not asking for rocket science here. This is really just keeping us up with our competitors in the G7 and other developed economies. And it makes sense. As Toby had said, it's a very large part of our economy in general. And if we really aren't measuring it, we're running blind, and we need to start measuring it. And we're already part way there. We're not asking for anything that's a very big step here. So it's an incremental thing that if we feel if we put our weight behind it, we can actually make it happen.
Francis, let me stay with you for a second. How do you measure it? Because if you're asking everyone to measure, you've got to have a baseline. You've got to be measuring the same things. If you're going to count natural capital and embed it in your balance sheets, there's got to be a fundamental standard. So when HP is doing it with small companies, what are you asking them to measure? And how are you embedding that natural capital in your balance sheet?
So that's a great question, and I think it's a question that we as businesses face every day, because we've had 500 years of the balance sheet and we still haven't gotten that right. We're still grappling with sustainability metrics, to be fair. That's true. We don't have all of the right metrics. When we talk about the green buildings piece, do we pick LEED? Do we pick another standard? What is the standard that we go for? The whole system for measuring benefits from the non-financial side of things is evolving, and there is no one right way to do it. I think as a council we're open to suggestions, and part of forming the council is to form a place where people with good ideas can come to us and tell us what those ideas are as well, now that we're being public about what we're thinking about and discussing. I think the proposal right now, because we know that StatsCan has been doing some work in this area, is to just look on the measured resources that we have today, that we've got historical data for, and that we know we can bring into the balance sheet today. There's lots more that we could be talking about, but saying that we don't have great measures and saying that there's all these other things that we could be doing shouldn't stop us from getting started. And I think it's really putting that first step in the ground, that first stake, and looking, Australia's already doing it. What can we learn from what they're doing, and how can we move along? But not taking the fact that we haven't solved the metrics question as a reason for doing nothing.
I agree. I think it's a fundamental challenge, though, Kevin, and I want your view on it, and anyone else can jump in. What is this? Of course, it's not perfect, but you've got to have a baseline, and you've got to have something that is acceptable. So small companies, big companies, and governments begin to build a metric baseline, so you can start having a generally accepted accounting system, because it doesn't matter unless you measure it, kind of thing. So what's your view of what's the baseline?
Well, from a manufacturing standpoint, I totally agree with my colleague from HP. What gets looked at and measured gets better. So from our perspective, we have a very robust sustainability report. We've been providing that for 10 years. It's actually coming out, I believe, it's on our website. It's coming out next week. But the reality is that I call it the neutron microscope approach. The technology in the world today can solve almost any problem. So if we brought together 10 of the best scientists in the world and took the aperture of the microscope down on any one problem, we can solve it. The real issue is, what I see the gap is the communication, is getting the aperture of that microscope across all of Canada or North America. That's educating the public, incenting the public with the right information. So specifically, if we look at best in class, if it's Australia, and I like to do a gap analysis in my business, the question is, if they're at 10 and we're at 15, what are the specific items that they did, and how do we shamelessly steal their great ideas and convert them into action and priorities? And that's what we do in our business, and I think that's how results get fundamentally moved very quickly.
Did you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, to me, measurements is the key, but it's also measuring of what? We should ask the corporations, the businesses, all right, what do you want to become and when? What is left to be done for you? Let's talk about what's left to be done. We could talk about what we did, but talking about what's left to be done is extremely important. Life cycle assessment for us is a way of measuring impact of raw material. But when you have your life cycle assessment, you have your EPD, that is just the start. We know, you know where you are. But then afterwards, you have to improve year over year on everything, and not just one product, but on everything. And that, to me, is an education, because through this process, you learn. And also, those who are reading those life cycle assessment also learn on the impact of everything. The raw material, the chemical that goes into raw material, all of these. And most importantly, it shows transparency. We need to ask corporations to be transparent on what they report. Not what they just want to report, but what is needed to be reported. And environmental impact of everything is a good start on being transparent and reporting on it.
Philip.
Just on that note, I think what we're talking about here are the barriers to creating a sustainable economy. And I think one of the key elements in creating a sustainable economy is leadership. We need leadership across the private sector, in the public sector, to take a stand, identify sustainability as a priority, and put action plans into place. And to the point about measuring greenhouse gases, I worked with one of my colleagues who's in the audience here trying to establish a greenhouse gas footprint for our company. And it is not easy. There's no rules. There's no generally accepted greenhouse gas principles like the accountants have. You have to go out there and try and figure it out, and try and figure out whether someone who runs their computer at their desk, is the electricity going to that computer, is that my footprint because I own the building and they're in my building, or is it their footprint? So you go through all of this stuff, but you have to make the commitment to it, to take the time and invest the resources, both financial and people, to take a stand, hit your bottom, get your starting point, and then move on from there. And we hit 2007 as our starting point for our GHG footprint of our real estate portfolio. And now we've got 6 years of history. We work with our property managers to look at the numbers, analyze what's driving them, where we can save money, where we can encourage the behaviors of our tenants to reduce energy. So it's all part of establishing it, setting the objective, setting the benchmark, and moving forward from there.
Can you just focus on that, whether it's on green buildings or as you talk about trying to measure your greenhouse gas emissions or your footprint, or you're embedding natural capital in the balance sheet? From a risk assessment point of view, what's the driver of doing it? Yes, there's lowering energy costs, and there's the efficiency play. I totally understand that. There may be a public relations element, and I appreciate that. What's the, in your view, is there a risk assessment associated with that that also drives the need to build better buildings, and is that a driver?
Well, since the financial crisis, risk management has become one of the key priorities within the financial services sector and across all of business. And managing your business holistically in terms of your consumption, reputational risk, your operational risk, I mean, these all flow together, and they become an inherent part and have to be integrated in how you manage your enterprise in order to meet your objectives.
All right. What about on the green buildings front, Andrea? And you mentioned a lot of what TELUS is doing. what's the driver there, and what could maybe incentivize that to go larger? Some companies are doing it. What mechanisms that the council's talking about in terms of removing those barriers, what may they be?
So maybe building on the last question and the last comments, when we look at our brand and what our brand represents, it's just such a natural fit for us to have environmental and sustainable growth as one of the key focus areas of our company. And in fact, it's one of the things that it gets considered as a key criteria, along with the economic considerations and the consumer considerations of any decision. One of the interesting stats that we've noticed is actually team member statistic, and something that I think the younger generation is really standing up for. And it's a stat, something like 80% of people looking for jobs today want to work for a company that stands up for environmental causes. And I think, and we talked earlier on the panel earlier today, that consumers are demanding more from companies. And I think as part of what we offer, we have to take that demand seriously as leaders, and look out even further to what that commitment can mean. And I think that helps change our perspective and change where our direction is going. When it comes to specifically green buildings and the council and the work that we're pursuing, I do think that large building owners and developers have to demonstrate their commitment and their leadership in this regard and set some targets for themselves. And I think if they do that, they should be rewarded, and that reward might come in the form of a fast-tracked permitting process. We've seen examples in LA and San Diego and San Francisco where the fast-tracking process is something in the magnitude of 25% more expedited than for developers that aren't necessarily pursuing a greener approach. And I think we need to have some examples of that. And we're working as a council specifically with Vancouver and with Calgary to advance those goals. We've also looked at an example from the UK where for existing buildings that are being sold, there should be some mechanisms in place for some energy efficiency there. So, and then I guess the final piece on that is disclosure. And we're recommending that all large buildings should be labeled. You should have to disclose what your energy efficiency is. And we don't have that in place today, and it's something that we think as consumers and as the public, we should know about that. No different than disclosing the ingredients of what you're eating. We should know what companies are doing from an environmental perspective and demand that information.
We have 4 minutes left, and I got to get to green bonds because it's important, but I know, Francis, you wanted to just weigh in on that, and then we'll quickly get into green bonds.
Yeah, just to talk about what the council was looking for, some quick wins, and those are the reasons that we picked these three areas. Again, back to that concept that this is not something that's rocket science. This is being done today, where we can advance greener building design approvals just to get a fast track, which is a saving for the developer, and then it's a win-win-win situation. So we're asking for incremental change that we feel we can put our weight behind to make a difference and just keep the flow of these ideas coming and going. So, and it's really building on some of the work that, the kinds of things that Julia was talking about on the first panel that TAF have been doing. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a real connection between a lot of these ideas. Can we just get quickly into green bonds in the last couple of minutes we've got? Maybe, Phil, maybe you could just sort of start defining a bit what the green bonds are and what role they can play in terms of unlocking some of the capital investment.
Sure. The concept of green bonds, as the council is advocating, relates to creation of financial instruments which are credit enhanced by government in order to reduce their cost and consequently increase reduce their cost as well as increase the liquidity of those instruments. And the green bonds that we're advocating would be focused on and ring-fenced for the purposes of financing public infrastructure as it relates to sustainable components of society, public transportation, renewable power, that sort of thing. I mean, Sun Life has been investing in renewable power funding for many, many years. We're one of the leading investors in renewable power in Canada, but those have been all direct investments with the originators. The idea of getting government involved, enhancing the creditworthiness of the instrument, I think could add a significant element to the liquidity of that, create more availability of funds, and allow faster and lower cost expansion of the public infrastructure.
All right, I think I have a minute, so I'll give it to Kevin.
As a publicly traded company that relies on the financial community for lots of money for an investment, I would love to see where we already are, where we reduced our greenhouse gases 80% from our level of 1990. I think we have a good pedigree and track record. I personally don't see many of the investors, unless you have all of the other metrics you're going to deliver, coming to the center purely on that basis. But I think companies like mine and others in the environment that are already there and have a really focused approach on sustainability, I think we should and will be rewarded in the future.
Toby, you gave the first word, I'll give you the last word. What's the future of the council?
Well, we're going to get these three things done in the next 18 months. Concrete things that have been implemented in other jurisdictions. We're going to get systems in place, so you build a green building, you save time and you save money on your permits. If you want to raise money on the capital markets to finance green infrastructure, you can do that and tap some of the $21 trillion. We have this issue where we think capital is scarce in Canada. It's not scarce in Canada. We have one of the healthiest balance sheets in the world. We don't need to sell out our natural resources to companies in China or India. Not that they can't bring some technology and access to markets in some cases, but we don't need to sell it to them because we need the capital. We have the strength of the balance sheet, and if we get some slight tweaks and unplug the plumbing, there's $23 trillion of investors out there who are clamoring for opportunities in this low carbon investment space. So we want to catalyze that opportunity and see Canada surf a wave of prosperity over the coming years.
I'd just like to add, there's a belief that big is the only way it works, but I'll add my favorite quote from Darwin. It's not the largest or the most powerful or the most intelligent of the species that survives. It's the one that's most adaptable to change. So this is the future. We have to be adaptable, right from every consumer right to the largest corporations.
The lesson of the Chihuahua. All right, Toby Heaps, Kevin Clarke, Andrea Goertz, Claude Ouimet, Philip Gillin, Francis Edmonds. Give them a big hand. That was really good. Thanks, all of you.